Уважаемый Владимир Владимирович, дорогие гости.
Vladimir Putin, dear guests, please allow me, before we move on to our conversation, I'd like to thank you, Mr. President, that throughout all these years you've been helping maintain a wonderful tradition. The tradition is that the information agency of Russia, TASS news agency, gathers its foreign colleagues to meet with you. And I don't know the way you find every time you find time in your busy schedule and you find time to have you been offered a tour around this center? Yes, we have, and possibly after the conversation we'll go up to the roof. Don't agree to that. You shouldn't? Is it dangerous? No. It's hard to get out of the cleaning grip of Mr. Miller. It's hard to get out of it because he talked about detail of every part of this building. He's in love with this building and it's hard to get out. But did you like the building? Yes, I did, naturally. What's the view from the 87th floor? Yes, it is beautiful, and I hope that you will like it as well. Mr. Putin, today you have 16 countries represented here through its leading information agencies. There were supposed to be more of us. However, our Indian and Brazilian colleagues were not able to travel here because there have been certain issues with the election, and our Egyptian colleagues broke a leg right before the trip, so naturally we wish him to get better as soon as possible. But those who have traveled here would like to welcome you in this most beautiful city of the world, St. Petersburg, and in this new hip place called Lahte Center. Before you can see the people, and we think that they make up for about 80% of the whole global news flow. And throughout the time that we haven't met, many of the countries that they represented all of a sudden became non-friendly countries to Russia. But possibly that would make it even more interesting to take a look at what's happening in these countries and what they think most important. Despite the fact that it's meeting number 8, we like to note that it's taking place when TASS news agency is celebrating 120th birthday. I think it's the first time that such a meeting is taking place amid such complex conditions, and it seems that the world has gone crazy and it's been pushed to the brink on purpose. But we truly hope that after this meeting we'll come maybe a step closer to understanding the way we can lift this tension, to lower the degree of the double standards and misunderstanding of each other and hostility to boot. Colleagues, as a moderator, on behalf of TASS news agency, I'll give you the chance to ask you one main question. I don't know whether it will be possible to ask the second question or number 3 question. It will all depend on the president. And we have a wonderful tradition. The first floor goes to the beautiful part of humanity, to women. Why? Because Russia treats women traditionally with love and respect and with awe. So the first question goes to our wonderful Irina Akulovich, Director General of Belta, Belarus telegraph agency. She also has a higher education in music, so we'll expect her to set the right tone and tonality to our question. Madam Akulovich, you have the floor. If you'd allow me, I'd like to welcome you all, and possibly you've been held in this tower for half a day, I guess, and I'd like to apologize. I'd like to repeat myself that it's very hard to get out of the grip of Mr. Miller, the head of Gazprom, and he keeps talking about each detail on each element of the building, and his optimism is viral, contagious, so to speak, about the Gazprom activities. People here are very well informed. It's hard for me to imagine what can I tell you that you don't know already. You know it all, and possibly you know even better than I do. Whatever I say, you would still think that you know it better than I do. Therefore, I suggest that we have more of a, not a Q&A evening, but rather an exchange of opinions. I think it will be more interesting. It will be interesting for me to learn your opinion as well to the questions that concern you. And I think that's all I wanted to say at the outset. So, Madam Akulovich, please, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for this opportunity to have a conversation with you. We understand fully well that indeed you have a very busy schedule. This meeting is awaited not only by us, but the largest news agencies and the world media are closely following it as well. I'd like to say that the right to ask the first question is not only that we're trying to regulate gender issues, but also because Belarus is the closest nation for Russia. It's not a question, but it's more of a exchange of opinions and a statement. With Alexander Lukashenko, you've met in the 90s, so you know our president for more than 30 years now. There have been very different times in relations between our countries and their relations. Nevertheless, you managed to find all solutions to all matters, security and economic issues. I wanted to ask you, is it hard or is it easy for you now to talk to them? And are there leaders in the European Union with whom you can find solutions to complex issues today? Thank you. Yes, I've known the president of Belarus for a very long time. Indeed, we've been through different times. There were different relations. But since at the very core of the relations there are fundamental interests of both nations, of the people of Russia and the people of Belarus, therefore, we've followed that precisely. And following that, we've managed to find a solution to even most complex issues, seemingly impossible to solve without simple answers. It is why, from the very beginning, we have worked to build, and we continue to do that, to build a union state. And we're successful. We're doing that following the aspirations of our peoples. We're doing very carefully, very calmly, and always when we try to find a solution to any matter, or when we take a step, we're always taking a look at our interests. First and foremost in the sphere of economy, politics, and foreign policy as well. It may seem strange, but also in environmental sphere and cultural sphere. This set of issues, when we're looking at it comprehensively, at what unites us, that allows us to solve in small issues, sometimes even most complex when they arise. And you know that we have such a relationship that we can always look at something. If we take a look at our trade in dollar equivalent, and it's not a secret, everyone knows that, $48 billion US dollars, almost $50 billion US dollars. And that's impressive. And this economic relationship is very diversified. It goes for agriculture. Almost 90% of the whole export of Belarus is to the Russian market, as for agriculture. As for industrial production and cooperation, quite recently we've discussed in Minsk. It seems that we're constantly in touch and we're always discussing these matters. And my trip after re-election as the president of Russia was a seemingly matter of ritual, but not so. We gathered key players from the government, and there were some disputes as well that regarded the industrial cooperation and localization of production. It's a traditional matter. Still, we were talking about our supply of our goods, and first and foremost, oil to the processing plants of Belarus. And we were also talking about products of Belarus going to the Russian market and so on. So all these issues are very tangible, and the quality of life of our citizens depends on them. But I can repeat myself that we have a good sentiment, and aspiration of society helps us always find a solution. You know, sometimes it's out of the box. however strange it may seem, we have such a great relationship and it seems a routine matter. But no, you always have to make an effort to find an answer to the questions that arise. We're successful, and I know that we'll continue so. So there are no difficult matters with Belarus. No, there are such, but the solutions can be found. We always find a solution, because at the foundation of these solutions are the interests of both nations. So can you find such solutions with the leaders of the European Union? Well, you can find it with leaders if they felt more confident. They could find more courage to defend their national interests, but I'm sure that colleagues will talk about that later. Thank you, Madam Makulovich, and I would like to give the floor to the Chief Global News Agency, Madam Samia Nakul. She has traveled through many hotspots and was heavily wounded in Iraq. Please, you have the floor, Madam Nakul.
Thank you, Mr. President.
When did this happen with you? When we were in...
During the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. It's during the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Thank you. Thank you for receiving us. Mr. President, given your past interaction with both President Donald Trump and President Biden, can you give us, according to your perspective and your views, which one do you think would be the most favorable candidate or, to U.S. and Russian relations, given the ongoing war that is going on in Ukraine now?
I have already spoken about that, and everyone perceived my statement about President Biden with a smirk, so to speak. And in that, they saw some kind of a hidden critique of President Biden. Well, indeed, he's an old-school politician. And the fact that he didn't like it, and to a certain extent, he started to attack me. Well, I knew that that would happen. That means that I was right and he's predictable. That only confirms our notions about what I've talked about. But in general, we don't really care, because President Trump, ex-President Trump, who was accused of being a spy for Russia, we know that it's pure nonsense, just garbage, just an element of domestic political infighting between Democrats and Republicans. Baseless, ridiculous accusations against Trump. Well, we have always perceived that as an element of domestic bickering in the United States. That was later confirmed during a national investigation in the U.S., and there were no connection with President Trump. It never existed. However, what remains a fact is that he, during his presidency, started to introduce massive sanctions against the Russian Federation. He left the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. That happened during his presidency. So, and I'm speaking very sincerely now, that we believe, thinking that something will change in the U.S. policy regarding Russia, we don't think that anything will change. No serious changes will take place. But what's happening in the United States, you know it fully well. What happens during the political infighting, they're burning themselves from the inside. Their political system, their state. And I have to say it, whether it's pleasant or not. And their alleged leadership in democracy, they're also burning to the ground. Because it is apparent to the rest of the world that the prosecution of Trump, especially in court, on the allegations that happened due to events that happened years ago, without direct proof, well, this is purely using the court system for political purposes. It is apparent to us here in Russia, and I'm sure that it can be seen in the UK as well, and the rest of the world can see that as well. And most importantly, they think that in the United States as well, because after a well-known decision of the court, where the jury gave a guilty verdict, we all know that, the ranking of President Trump grew by 6% right away, I think. And donations to his election campaign also increased. What does it tell us? It tells us that the people in the US do not believe the court system, the justice systems of the United States when it makes such decisions, and believe that they're politically motivated. Maybe it's counterintuitive, but in the foreign policy, in domestic policy, and in economic policy as well, I think that today's administration are conducting one mistake after another. Sometimes I get surprised at what's happening. Therefore, we are watching it from a side. We've never interfered in the domestic politics of the United States, and we do not intend to do it, but we'll see what will happen, what it would lead to. I'd like to wrap up my answer with what I've begun. The end result, as we believe, does not have a great significance. We'll work with any president elected by the U.S. people.
With regard to Ukraine, you don't think anything will change in terms of their support for Ukraine, for the Ukraine war if Trump comes back? You don't think there'll be a change?
It's hard to say. I don't think I can make a clear-cut conclusion whether something will change or not. I think we'll need to take a look at the priority of the future administration. If the future administration is or will follow the national interest, and if they think that the national interest will be to stabilize the situation within the country, not to bet on migration, but to consolidate the society within the United States, to amend the mistakes that led to a tremendous debt and inflation within the U.S., then, naturally, following the domestic national interests, if they would follow them, then they would pursue the goals of global liberalism that I think is destroyed by the United States from the inside. Well, they strive to be the leader of the global liberalism. Well, no. But if they follow the national interest, then maybe there could be some changes in the foreign policy towards Russia and towards the conflict in Ukraine. But remember how many ifs I mentioned. In that case, some changes are possible. But I think you would agree with me that no one is interested in the United States, in Ukraine. They're interested in the magnificence, in the supremacy and leadership of the United States in the world. And they don't want to allow any kind of success by Russia. Indeed, because they believe that in that case, that will be detrimental to the U.S. leadership. That's the whole point of what the U.S. is doing. But if the future administration changes the priorities for itself, they would set the goals differently, and they would see the essence of their work in strengthening the United States from the inside, finance, economy, building normal relations in the world, more respectful towards everyone, then something may change. I think that it depends on the sentiment in the society. And I think that the sentiment is shifting to that end. And I think that if the future administration will catch that wind in their sails, then the change is possible.
Спасибо, госпожа Накул.
Thank you, Madam Nakul. Now I give the floor to the men. Now I'd like to ask my question to President. Now I'm going to give the floor to Vugar Aliyev, the chair of Azerbaijan. Please, you have the floor. Mr. Putin, thank you for the time that you are giving us. Today, the relations between Azerbaijan and Russia are developing in an upward trend, and recent visit of President Aliyev to Moscow gave a chance not only to celebrate a memorable anniversary, 50 years of the bomb railroad, but also to discuss bilateral relations. What's your take on the future outlook for bilateral cooperation, and in particular, the development of the transportation corridor north-south?
Our relations are developing successfully, reliably, and in a pragmatic fashion. You know, we feel the stance of Azerbaijan, which is building our interstate relations based on mutual interests. And also there is an element of mutual sympathy, because otherwise it wouldn't be possible to explain the presence of 300 schools in Russian language in Azerbaijan. Children are being taught in Russian, and I know that President Aliyev is fully supporting the study of the Russian language in Azerbaijan, and we can see that in all aspects, in all spheres, which tells us that the leadership of Azerbaijan believes that the Russian language is going to be something the Azeri citizens are going to need, and they will need that language for further developing our bilateral ties, which are developing. Our trade stands at 4.5, 4.6 billion US dollars, and the pace of this development is very good, very steady, and we are increasingly diversifying our relations. I'm confident that should we manage to preserve these good intentions on both sides, and in Russia we share those intentions, then the outcomes are going to be great. Of course, there's still a lot that needs to be done, and you are absolutely correct in saying that we need to further develop the logistics, not just the north-south corridor, but also there are other dimensions to that, such as setting up logistics hubs at the Azeri-Russian border, at the Dagestan stretch where the works are currently underway. It also applies to other directions. We have quite a big number of students studying at Russian universities, receiving scholarships from the budget, and we see there is a very big interest in receiving further education. As far as that north-south corridor is concerned, it can turn into an international route which is in high demand, because right from here, cargo, and shipments from the port of St. Petersburg can flow through the European part of Russia, then on to Azerbaijan, and then onwards to the coast of the Gulf, maybe 10 days or so faster than if they were to go through the Suez Canal. We are not saying anything bad about the Suez Canal. It's very good for the world trade, but this new trade would be an additional route, a very good one for shipping goods from the north to the south and vice versa, 10 days faster. This will help us save a lot. This is a very good route, but still there is a lot that needs to be done. We are working on both sides. I am aware that President Aliyev supports this project. We've spoken with him about that on many occasions. The leadership of Iran is also in support of this project, and since this project promises to be very beneficial, there are other foreign investors that have expressed their interest in that route, not regional investors, investors from other, say, the wealth funds, sovereign wealth funds of the Arab countries because they're always searching for a possibility to invest money in reliable endeavors. There are still issues that need to be studied further, in particular what stretches and where and how they're going to be funded. Is it going to be based on loan, or there's going to be direct funding from Russia? How this is going to fit with the strings that are going to head westwards across the territory of Azerbaijan. We need to finalize some issues with our Iranian friends and partners, or whether it's going to be a narrow gauge or a wide gauge road. I mean, the one that's going to be built on the territory of Iran. But the crux of the matter is everyone is determined to implement this project. We've set up the directorate. VTB as the organization responsible for that. I'm confident that we will complete this project. Well, it's going to take some time. There are some issues about funding, but this is not the only project we are pursuing together. Apart from that, Azerbaijan is a Caspian state. It's one of the 5 Caspian states, and that means that we've got many joint interests. Some apply to the environment of the Caspian Sea. Thank you, Mr. Aliyev. And now I'd like to give the floor to a state you will never be indifferent to, and that's Germany. We've got Martin Romanchik, head of news of DPA. He knows from first hands about our country because in the 90s he worked as a correspondent in Moscow. Over to you, sir.
Guten Abend, Herr Präsident. Vielen Dank für die Einladung.
Good evening, Mr. President. Good evening, everyone. Chancellor Olaf Scholz has agreed to provide weapons to Ukraine. If Chancellor were to change his opinion, what would your stance be then? And what do you think the future of Germany is going to be? Have you made any threats or any warnings to Chancellor when he made the decision to provide weapons to Ukraine? Well, we never threaten anyone, especially if that means threatening the head of another country, because that would be just bad form. We have different positions on different matters. We are aware of the position European countries have taken, and in particular taken by Germany with regard to the developments in Ukraine. Everyone thinks that it was Russia that had started the war in Ukraine. But I would like to underscore that no one in the West, in Europe, wants to remember how this tragedy had started, and it started with a coup d'etat, an anti-constitutional coup d'etat that happened in Ukraine. That's the origin of the war. Is it Russia that is to blame for that coup d'etat? No, it's not. And have those that are trying to accuse Russia forgotten that the foreign ministers of Poland, Germany, and France came to Kiev and put their signature to a document aimed at settling the political crisis? They put that signature to the document as guarantors that the crisis would be resolved in a peaceful, constitutional manner. Europe, and in particular France and Germany, prefer to leave that out. And if they were to remember that, then the question would arise, why did the European countries and Germany and France, as guarantors in particular, have not demanded that the Ukrainian leadership should get back to the legal field, as it were? Why have they ignored their responsibilities as the guarantors of those agreements that have been reached? They're the ones to blame. They are guilty of what has transpired alongside with those forces from the US that provoked the anti-constitutional coup d'etat. This was followed by the desire of the citizens of Crimea to withdraw from Ukraine. Then it was succeeded by the decision of the people of Donbass not to submit to those who had supported the coup d'etat. That's the origin of the conflict. Afterwards, Russia has made every effort to arrive at a formula that would allow to peacefully resolve that conflict. In 2015, Minsk saw the signing of the so-called Minsk agreements. And incidentally, these agreements were endorsed by a decision of the UN Security Council. It's a document that should have been implemented, but it has not been. Instead, a choice was made in favor of addressing that matter in a military manner. Artillery and armed forces started to be used against the civilians in the east of Ukraine. For some reason, in the West, and in Germany, in France, in other countries, no one wants to remember that. So we facilitated the signing of the Minsk agreements. But it turns out that no one intended to observe the agreements. And the former Chancellor of Germany, former President of France have said that publicly. Mr. Romanchik, what am I supposed to make of that? They have made public statements that they had never intended to observe the Minsk agreements. They only signed them to rearm Ukraine and to create a favorable environment for the continuation of hostilities. So they were simply duped. What other explanation could there be to that? For 8 years, we've been pursuing a peaceful solution to this issue. 8 years. Some time ago, the former Chancellor told me, you know, in Kosovo, yes, NATO had acted without the decision of the UN Security Council, but 8 years blood had been spilled in Kosovo, she said to me. And what about this particular case, when the blood of Russian people was being spilled in the east of Ukraine, in Donbass? Is it not blood? Is it water? For some reason, no one wanted to pay any attention to that. In the end, we were forced to act when the then Ukrainian authorities declared that they were happy with none of the points of the Minsk agreements, and the foreign minister declared that they were not going to observe the Minsk agreements. You know, that 8 years ago, there was a constant degradation of economy and in human rights. In Donbass, people were killed. So we were forced to recognize their independence. It took us 8 years to do that. We were hoping that we would find a peaceful solution. It was 8 years before it was declared that they were not going to observe the agreements. And once that happened, we had to attempt to use armed force to force them to observe those agreements. But we're not the ones to have started this war. The war started back in 2014 after the coup d'etat and the attempts at silence those who disagreed with the coup d'etat with the use of force, with the use of guns. Now, what did we do afterwards? So it took us 8 years before we recognized their independence, and once we understood that the Minsk agreements were never going to be implemented, please pay attention to that, we recognized the independence of these self-proclaimed republics. Could we do it from the point of view of international law? As Article 1 of the UN Charter states, we could do that because that amounts to the right of people to self-determination. And the ICJ made a ruling, in written form, which states that if a certain territory of a certain country decides to become independent, it does not have to apply to higher institutions of the said country. And that is what happened in Kosovo. So there is a ruling by the ICJ which says that if a territory decides to become independent, it is not to have to ask for permission from the capital in order for this right to self-determination to be implemented. And if that is the case, if that is what is stated in the ICJ ruling, then those self-proclaimed republics, which back then were not recognized, they were fully entitled to do that, which they did. And what about us? Were we entitled to recognize those republics? Yes, we were, and that is what we did. Then we entered into a treaty with them. Did we have that opportunity, that right to do that? Yes. And that treaty stipulated provision of aid to those republics in case of aggression. And Kyiv was pursuing a war against these countries which it had taken us 8 years to recognize. Did we have that right? Yes, we did. And then, in compliance with Article 51 of the UN Charter, we started to provide our assistance to them. Whatever anyone here says, I told exactly the same things to Secretary General Guterres. I explained the rationale to him. Where is the error? Where is the violation of international law here? There are none. From the point of view of international law, the response is, you attacked anyway. We did not attack. We were defending ourselves, and everyone needs to understand that. And the first step towards the war was made by those who had encouraged the bloody coup d'etat which ran afoul of the constitution. Now, as far as the provision of weaponry is concerned, such supplies to a conflict zone, well, that is always a bad thing. Especially because those who supply weapons are not simply supplying the weapons, they're also managing the weapons, controlling them. And that is a very dangerous, very serious step. We know that, and Germany does not deny that. I don't know how it got into the media, but, the generals of the Bundeswehr were discussing how and when they were to strike the Crimean Bridge, or rather facilities on the Russian territory, including the territories which no one doubts belong to Russia. When the first German tanks appeared on the Ukrainian soil, the German-produced tanks, it caused a moral and ethical shock in Russia because our relations with Germany had always been very good. Right now, there's talk that some missiles are going to appear that will strike the Russian territory. Then this will fully undermine the Russian-German relations. We understand, as a famous German political leader said after the Second World War, Germany had never been fully independent in the precise sense of the word, a fully sovereign state. We were in contact with Chancellor Scholz. We had multiple meetings. I would not give any assessment to the performance of the German government. It's up to the German voters to pass judgment of that. Soon the European Parliament elections are coming, and we'll see how it goes. I still have many good friends in Germany. I'm trying not to compromise them so that they do not have any problems. I try not to maintain relations right now with them. But I've known them for many years, and I know that they're reliable friends, and I've got many of those in Germany. And I know the landscape and how things go in the political landscape. The CDU is around 30%, 16% is the Social Democrats, SPD, 15% Alternative for Germany, AfD, and the rest. And this is how the voters are responding. This shows the sentiment among German citizens. I understand Germany's dependence in defense, in security in general. I'm cognizant of their dependence in information policy because, whatever big media outlet you look at, you'll see that the end beneficiary is some kind of American foundation. Well, I applaud those American foundations. They're doing a great job because they have a tight grip on the media landscape in Germany, lying low all the while.
It's very hard to stand up to that. I understand it. However, some very simple things, in those things, well, it's even strange that no one today at the German leadership is defending the German interests. Yes, Germany does not have the full sovereignty, but there are Germans, and you need to think about their interests. Look at it. They blew up those poor pipelines in the Baltic Sea. No one is even indignant about that, as if it's the right thing to do. Look, still, we continue to supply gas to Europe through the Ukrainian territory. We continue to do it, don't we? But there were two pipelines, two systems. One of them was closed down by the Ukrainian side. They simply turned it off. No foundation for that decision. Still, there is one pipeline left, and the European consumers receive the gas through the Turk Stream. There's also Russian natural gas coming through the Turk Stream to the European consumer, and they receive it. Well, they blew up one string of the Nord Stream pipeline, but one of them is still functional. Why doesn't Germany want to receive gas for that system? What's the logic in there? You can receive it through the Ukrainian territory, you can receive it through Turkey, yes, but not through the Baltic Sea. What kind of nonsense is that? There is no formal logic behind it. I simply cannot grasp it. If they said, well, Europe should not receive any gas from Russia, well, all right, we'll survive it. Gazprom will survive it. You don't want it. Instead, you buy LNG at a 3 times higher price. What about your environmentalists? Don't they know the way LNG is received through fracking process? You should ask the U.S. citizens in those regions where this kind of gas is produced. Sometimes instead of water, they have some kind of sludge flowing through their pipes. Do your environmentalists know about it? Possibly. Poland took their pipeline, Yamal, Europe. They closed it down. Germany received natural gas through Poland. We didn't close it down. It was done by the Poles. What's the result? The result, the impact on the German economy of the breakdown of our ties in the energy sphere is known better to you than to me. It is rather sad. Many major industrial companies trying to find a place to land somewhere, but not in Germany. They open it up in Asia, in the US, However, the economic conditions are not competitive. And that, in turn, might have difficult, harsh consequences for the whole economy of Europe, because German economy is the driving force behind the European economy. Not to offend others. If it's sick, if it's coughing and sneezing, it will spread over to the rest of Europe. And now the French economy is on the brink of recession, and everyone knows that fully well. If the German economy goes even slower, then the rest of Europe will be in shock. I'm not calling you to break down some kind of Euro-Atlantic ties or anything else. Someone will start hyping that, I don't know. Someone will hear what I'm saying and say that he's calling for the breakdown of Euro-Atlantic solidarity. No, listen, I think you have a false policy. This is a major mistake at every turn, and I think that the U.S. is doing that. A major mistake is happening due to their desire to maintain leadership. With the tools that they're using, they're shooting themselves in the foot. But it's even worse for Europe. They could have said, yes, we support you here and there, but if we undermine our own economy, it will be a problem for everyone. It should never be done. It's a taboo. Please do not lay claim to that. But the current leadership is not doing that. Sometimes, I'm at loss. Where is the logic behind these actions? All right, they tried to undermine the Russian economy, and they believed that it will happen within 3, 4, 6 months. But everyone can see that that did not happen. Last year, we had economic growth at 3.4%, I think. This year, the first quarter of the current year, the economic growth of the Russian Federation stood at 5.4%. Moreover, the World Bank has recalculated our growth. We have set the goal for ourselves, according to the international financial institutions. We were ranked number 5 on PPP, purchasing parity power, in the world. We're ranked number 5, and our goal was to be ranked number 4. And I think that we are following the calculations of our colleagues in international financial institutions. Very recently, last week, I think, the World Bank counted our GDP and came to a conclusion that we're bypassing Japan. According to the World Bank, Russia today is ranked number 4 in the world on purchasing power parity. Our goal has been reached. But it's not what matters. That's not an end in itself. It's important to maintain the trend, the impetus, the move forward. And we're still maintaining that because, as I told you, the growth stood at 5.4% of GDP. But I'm not saying this to boast to you. I'm just saying that those who are trying to be detrimental to us, that try to put a brake on our development, but what they're doing is more detrimental to them than to us. And understanding that, they're supposed to draw some conclusions and to course correct for themselves, for their own sake, but it's not happening. I don't want to offend anyone here, but the level of professionalism of those people who are making decisions, including in Germany, I think leaves a lot to be desired. I think it would make sense not to move away from the European topics and to give the floor to France, where quite officially they're not ruling out sending of military to Ukraine. And we have Karim Talbi, editor-in-chief for Europe, and he speaks Russian very well because, just like Martin Romanchik, he worked as a correspondent in Moscow. Mr. Talbi, you have the floor. My question also regards Ukraine. Why Still, you cannot tell us the loss of Russian military servicemen in the Ukrainian during the conflict. If it's the only thing that is of interest to you, I say that usually no one talks about it. And if they talk about it, then generally they distort the real figures. Now, I can tell you with full confidence that our losses, especially if it regards, well, unfortunately, irreparable losses, they're many times smaller than the Ukrainian side. And I can tell you the number of people and the prisoners of war, our soldiers and officers that are being held captive, 1,348 people. I know these figures because we're working with them every day. And quite recently, there was an exchange of 75 people on each side. The Ukrainian soldiers that we're holding are 6,465. If we talk about irreparable losses, I mean, the dead. And I think it's the same ratio, 1 to 5. So that's our logic here. That is why they're trying to conduct a total draft in Ukraine, because the losses on the battlefield are tremendous. You know, we think that our calculations are that the Ukrainian army is losing about 50,000 people per month. These are all casualties. Though I think there are 50-50 ratio of irreparable losses and injuries. The total draft that is being held right now does not solve this issue. Nevertheless, according to our data from different sources, about 30,000 per month is being drafted, conscripted. Whether it's a false draft or not, well, there are not many volunteers right now. So I think last month they have drafted about 55,000, but it does not solve the issue. Why? Because this draft just covers the losses. It's all just to repair the losses. It's a major issue that leads to the lowering the age of draft. Now, they've lowered it from 27 to 25 years, and we simply know it. Well, it's an open secret. There are basically no secrets there in Ukraine. The administration of the U.S. is insisting on stage-by-stage lowering of the conscription age from 23 to 20 to 18 or to 18 years straight away. Because right now, they're asking 17-year-olds, 17-year-old males to be put on the military register. And we know it for sure. That's the demand by the U.S. administration. It's a demand to the Ukrainian leadership. If we can think that their leadership after the elections were cancelled. I've recently spoken publicly about that. I think when I met with press, when I left Uzbekistan after a visit there. And I think that the U.S. administration will indeed make the current Ukrainian leadership make this decision to lower the drafting age to the 18 years, and they later would get rid of Zelensky. First, it needs to be done, because this is a very difficult matter. A law must be adopted. Certain steps must be taken. Now we're in June 2024. And to do that, all of it, I think it would take a year. So till spring, the beginning of the next year, he will be tolerated when Zelensky does it all. They will wave him goodbye and will change. I think there are several candidates now. But it has to do with tremendous losses. 50,000 is the most modest calculations. 50,000 is what we see on the battlefield. And if you take into account that there are certain losses that, well, we know that they're there, but we cannot confirm them because they're happening at the home front, but still tremendous losses. Can I allow me to ask yet another question about our Olympic Games? We used to have a journalist, Arman Surdin, on the 9th of May 2003, died in Ukraine. We think that he died after the drone strike, as we think. France is conducting an investigation. And they're saying that the drone that killed him came from Russia. Well, that's not my question, but the Ministry of Justice of France would like to conduct an investigation. Would like to conduct an investigation. Okay. Is Russia prepared to cooperate with France? So you would know what truly happened. It was a major tragedy for us, for our agency, because, he was survived by a family. He was 32. Roman Selin was 32 years old. So we like to have some closure, some kind of serious investigative work done to know what happened. Would Russia take part in that? We've never refused to take part in investigations. Do you know how many journalists died in the war zone? Do you remember, Dmitry? At least 30 journalists died. Our journalists died there. And no one has given us an opportunity to investigate what happened to them. That's number one. Number two, if we talk about what's happening in Ukraine, there, in jail, in prison of the Kiev regime, an American journalist was tortured to death. But unlike you, the United States, are not even asking what happened to him. He was an American citizen, a journalist. He was captured at the border, dragged into jail, and he died there. He was tortured to death. That's what happened. It's not a figure of speech, but no one asked what truly happened to him. Despite that, we're prepared to organize this investigation. I don't quite know how to put it into practice, because if a person died in a war zone, then, well, still, we can do everything in our power for that. Thank you very much, Mr. Talbi, and I'd like to give the floor to our Iranian colleague, Director General on the Information Energy Agency, IRNA, Mr. Ali Nadri. We appreciate that, Mr. Nadri, that despite the recent tragedy and death of President Raisi and the continued election campaign in your country, still found time to travel out to St. Petersburg. Please allow me to express to you, to the Iranian colleagues and Iranian nation, our deepest condolences. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to speak with my own language, so I speak Persian. باز هم من ممنون هستم از دعوتی که انجام شد. ملت ما این روزها داغدار از دست دادن رئیس جمهور وزیر امور.
Indeed, we're mourning the death of our foreign minister and the president, a number of people for administration. And you, in your letter, mentioned, indeed, there was a development of relations during the time of President Raisi. That is one of the great services of our president. You also pointed out the role played by President Raisi in the development of bilateral relations and the regional relations. And the question that I wanted to ask you is that there will be continued development of relations with Iran. What kind of program is planned Were there some agreements achieved with President Raisi? What is the outlook for Iran and Russia in the future? Thank you.
У нас развиваются хорошо отношения между.
We are developing the relations between Russia and Iran in a steady fashion, making good headway across many avenues. Both Russia and Iran happen to be under sanctions, different sanctions regimes. You know, I was surprised when we learned recently some of the levels of technological achievements in Iran. We were surprised how our Iranian friends had managed to preserve such a high level of production, industrial production in certain technologies, despite the sanctions that had been enforced for many years. We were pleasantly surprised. But our trade and economic ties are developing. We've got many joint projects. We would like to take additional efforts aimed at developing high-tech, certainly taking into account the restrictions. This is going to be difficult, but still, it can be done, and this is something we are going to do. Now, as for President Raisi, who was killed in this tragedy, I would like to say that we had very good, reliable, business-like relations with him. He was a very interesting person. He was a serious politician, a reliable partner. He was possessed of a great sense of irony and humor. And it was a very interesting person to talk to communicate with. Not just interesting, but also useful. And I would like to say that if we achieved agreement with him on something, then one could be 100% sure that this issue would not be lost sight of. That doesn't mean that all issues had been resolved, because it's not just up to the leaders that these issues depend on. But we were working together to improve and enhance our relations, and it was under President Raisi that Iran joined both BRICS and the SCO, which is testimony to the fact that we were moving together in the right direction, in particular in the direction of setting up a multipolar world order. And Iran has continued to play a significant role in that regard. There's one thing I would like to say, concluding my answer to your question. I would like to say that we are hopeful that everything that had been achieved by President Raisi in Russia-Iran relations is going to be picked up and continued. And I have no doubts that this is exactly what's going to happen, because everything we're doing meets the mutual interests of Russia and Iran. We know that the Iranian statehood is very stable. We're aware how the executive and the power system in Iran are organized. We know that it's not just the president and his colleagues who work on foreign policies. The supreme leader is also playing a significant role in that regard. So we're waiting for the elections of the next president to happen, and I look forward to meeting the new president of Iran at different international events, including the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the BRICS events. I'm confident that we will find common ground and will follow up on all the projects whose foundations were laid by the late President Raisi. The next speaker is a great friend of TASS agencies, editor-in-chief of Xinhua Agency, Mr. Liu Yangsong. He speaks perfect Russian. He loves Russian songs and Russian cinema. Over to you, please. Mr. President, recently you have conducted a state visit to China. You have quite close relations with China. This can be cited as a model for building relations between major powers. What's your take on the current state of cooperation between Russia and China?
Что касается двусторонних отношений,
Well,
то
as far as our bilateral relations go, I would like to tell you that they are not short-term relations. They are based upon fundamental principles. For 15 years, China has been our major trade partner. So we started to build our relations and we propelled it to the current level, not pursuing some short-term fleeting goals that come and go day in, day out. We decided to pursue this relationship based on mutual interests. We were acting in a calm, gradual fashion, and I can tell you that we are making huge headway. Currently, our bilateral trade has exceeded our expectations. It's $240 billion according to the Chinese statistics. We assess that number at 230 billion according to our statisticians. But it's not just about our trade. Our trade is being diversified and quite successfully to boot. And it's not just about hydrocarbons, hydropower. There's also supplies of oil and coal and energy. We're also building nuclear power plants in the People's Republic of China and doing that quite successfully. All of that is happening. But we're also cooperating in high tech. We've got very good prospects. I refer in particular to aviation, to AI. You know, we are happy. We celebrate China's successes in different domains, in particular in space exploration. These are some unique achievements we're talking about. And the Communist Party of China is the leading political force in China. Everything that's done over there is done under the guidance of the Communist Party of China. There's something I would like to draw your attention to. I said that. I don't know whether I said that in this format and whether that's going to be interesting to you, but there are some experts in Russia, very good economists, quite young people, albeit already very experienced. They say that the analysis of what's happening in China's economy and the analysis of what's happening in other economies across the world, including the leading economies such as the US, show that China has succeeded in building an efficient, albeit peculiar, economic model that might be even more efficient than the one of the US. And judging by the results the economy of China is demonstrating, this is something we can agree on. Yes, there might be some discussion. Some Western partners of ours say that China's economy is not entirely based on market. There are regulations by the party, but you know the outcome is out there for everyone to see, and it shows us that this model is more efficient. And no one would dare accuse China of that, whether that's market-based or not. It's 1.5 billion people, and the Chinese leadership needs to think about every citizen, each and every citizen, and not all of them live on the same level as an average European or American citizen. So it's up to the leadership of China to take the decisions that will allow them to see to the needs, vital needs of Chinese citizens. And all of that is done thanks to a good friend of mine and the leader of China, President Xi Jinping. They're achieving great successes, doing that reliably and steadily, and we can only be happy for them. We're aware of everything that's happening in the world's leading economies, including China's economy. China's economy is generally very reliable, and it's becoming increasingly based on high technology. And I think it's a huge mistake on the part of the US and a number of European countries that are trying to somehow stymie or bring down the pace of the Chinese economy. Because I think in order for them to be successful, they would need to fit those processes, to integrate them, rather than trying to obstruct them. Some very smart people say that China is overproducing cars and also overproducing electric cars. Who is saying such things? It's those who believe themselves to be proponents of the market. Don't they know who decides whether there is an overproduction or not? It's up to the market to decide. If China produces a certain number of cars and all of that is consumed and absorbed by the market, what kind of an overproduction are we talking about? It's just nonsense. Is it possible to call that an overproduction? No, that's not called that. That's not what it's called. It's called an attempt at stymieing the growth through non-market means, and that is harmful, in particular to the US economy. And why is that? Because, you know, you're not taking goods from China, these goods or those goods. What will it result in? Will it result in themselves producing something? No, it'll produce in having to buy from elsewhere, and this is going to be more expensive. This will result in higher inflation rate, and the higher inflation rate is going to have a nefarious impact upon the economic structure of the country that is doing such things. And it's going to be harmful, in this particular case, to the economy of the US. It's an error, a mistake, yet another one. Yet another mistake of the current administration of the US. As for China, yes, they have a very professional guidance by President Xi, and they are moving ahead at a very good pace. There are other fields. I've always spoken about them, and I can tell you that our cooperation in the international arena is a moderating factor and also a source of stability. You know, we conducted exercises, and we are going to continue conducting exercises, including military exercises. We're also engaged in military and technical cooperation, and we've got a lot to offer to our Chinese friends. And there's an interest on China's side in this kind of cooperation. But our cooperation is not confined either to economy or to military technical cooperation or to international cooperation. This year, we've proclaimed cross years of culture, and our moderator, you know, said that you know Russian songs, you speak Russian, and I think this is just as important as the rest that I've just spoken about, because that lays the foundations of relationships between the peoples. It creates a favorable environment for pursuing relations across all other sectors, and this is something we'll strive to stick to henceforth. And I'm hopeful that we will be able to meet with President Xi and speak about all of these issues. And, well, I hope we'll be able to meet within the framework of the SCO and BRICS. Mr. President, you know, I interviewed you 3 times. First time it happened in 2002. So it happened a long time ago. The interviews took place in Moscow and Beijing. This is the 4th interview, and it's in the city you were born in, and I'm very grateful to you for that. I wish you all the best. Thank you, Mr. Liu. Next, over to Spain, FA News Agency, Jose Manuel Sanz Mingate, Director of International Relations of FA News Agency, is a very professional, experienced journalist and also an outstanding expert on philosophy and history, an expert on European integration. Sir, over to you.
Gracias, presidente, por la oportunidad de...
Thank you, Mr. President, for this opportunity to meet you. I do not speak Russian, but I have read Russian authors. I am aware of Russia's great contribution to literature, science, and art. I think it's a pity that we're currently going through such a difficult phase in international relations. So I have a very delicate question, starting from tomorrow and until Sunday, 25 countries, European countries, are conducting elections. And you know that analysts, experts, as well as officials of European countries say that Russia is guilty of spreading misinformation with a view to destabilizing the electoral processes across Europe. What's your comment on that? Do you think the Russian government is behind this misinformation campaign? Thank you. Well, listen, we've just had a conversation with your colleague from Germany. Among other things, we have spoken about the economic situation in European countries. It's, the social politics is a function of the economic situation. It's a function of the income of your citizens. It's also a function of new jobs being created in an economy, or a function of consumption. On the whole, European countries are well-to-do states. And the major preoccupation of citizens is their material well-being. However, as a result of policies pursued by the overwhelming majority of Western countries, in particular European countries, this well-being people have grown accustomed to over the recent decades is fading. Well, if it's not fading, at least it's currently come under risk and threat. People feel that, and they understand that. And I think this is the main reason why traditional political parties and the parliamentary democracy at large are going through some rough patch. And if there's someone in Europe who doesn't want to analyze the mistakes they had made, and they're trying to shift the blame on some external factors, then it'll constitute yet another mistake that will prevent them from drawing the right conclusions and understanding full well what is really happening. That's the first part of my answer to your question. And the second goes as follows. Our media, in terms of their volume, the scope, their audience, and their capacity of exerting their influence of their audience, well, they are no match for the Western media, the press or internet media. I would hate to give you the wrong figures. My colleague is going to give you the figures. But whenever and wherever our journalists are trying to do their work, they run into obstacles. Their employees are threatened, their accounts bank accounts are shut down, their transport is seized. The list goes on. Is that what freedom of speech is? Certainly not. The only thing our media are doing, our Russian journalists are doing, is presenting the Russian view on the developments in our country and across Europe, as well as across the globe. Our views differ, but isn't that the idea? Is the goal of media to service the needs of the government? Well, even if it's the point of view of the Russian government, does not it deserve to be communicated to the audience in our country and in other countries? Isn't this what free flow of information is all about, whether you like that information or not? What are we supposed to do if you don't like some kind of information, or if someone thinks that it's biased? Well, you need to present another point of view, and you have to do that in a more convincing manner than the information you don't like is being communicated in, rather than shutting down media. In this particular case, Russian media that are constantly harassed in Europe and in the US.
And there's so few of them, just one or two. And they're all being strangled and closed down. And they're still referencing the fact that we are having some kind of influence on the public opinion in the Western countries. If you simply take a look at the volume, what we are prepared to provide as a content in the information market of the Western countries, it's simply laughable. It's not a matter of someone conducting some kind of a nefarious policy against the European Union in this case. It's a matter of the fact that what the leadership of major European countries have brought their economies to, what kind of state, and what kind of policy they're conducting in an international arena, and whether their people like it or not. And I'll repeat with what I've started. You shouldn't shift blame elsewhere. You need to take stock of your own actions and hold yourself accountable. That would allow you to draw some right conclusions and possibly course correct, if necessary. Thank you. Mr. Migoda, was that enough? Yes, okay. And next is Kazakhstan, Director General of Kazinform News Agency. Oscar, please, you have the floor. Mr. President, could you please tell us about the future of relations between Kazakhstan and Russia as neighboring countries? It's very good. No other way to put it. We have very close, well, not just close, we have ally and strategic partnership cooperation that fully applies to Russia and Kazakhstan and their relations. This applies to trade and economic ties. They're showing sustained growth each year. And the level of our trade also speaks about that, the growing volume trade. We have many dimensions of our cooperation. It's impossible even to list them all. Energy, industrial cooperation, outer space, a lot of them. We have a tremendous land border, and people connect to each other. 76 regions of the Russian Federation have direct relations with Kazakhstan, with the territories in Kazakhstan. Direct ties. And they're possibly even more efficient, and they work even better because people are directly talking to each other. They know each other and trust each other. With Mr. Tokayev, we're always in touch. We have very good relations based on trust. And now, if we talk about energy, you know that we're going to sell gas not only to Uzbekistan, but to Kazakhstan as well. To the northern Kazakhstan, they require energy. Yes, Kazakhstan is itself a producer of energy. Still, there are some regions of Kazakhstan that require gas supply, and it's easier and cheaper to receive it from us than to build new routes that would cost billions of dollars. Honestly, I don't see a single issue that would be of dispute and would complicate our relations in any way. We spoke about cooperation with China. 90% of our trade is done in national currencies with the People's Republic of China. And the same is happening in our relations with Kazakhstan. I think we're at about almost 100%. As for the United States, well, and it'll be the same kind of questions later at the plenary session in SPIF. One of the greatest mistakes of the United States is they're prohibiting from using dollar as in international payments and using it as a tool, and they're simply undermining the trust towards dollar. It's ridiculous. They should have taken care of the dollar and to preserve it and to raise its profile and its standing. They're simply killing it off with their own hands. But that stimulates us to move towards national currencies. It turns out it doesn't stand in the way of developing our relations. On the contrary, it helps us strengthen our national currencies. Humanitarian sphere and education sphere are also a matter of our cooperation. So we have a very active joint work in all spheres, and also thanks to President Tokayev, because he's continuing our cooperation in all these spheres. Soon we're going to meet in Astana for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit and so on. Naturally, I have the invitation. I will make use of it. Thank you. Now moving on to the next participant. Deputy Head of ANSA Agency, Stefana Poli. Mr. Poli, just like Sami Yanakul from Reuters, has tremendous experience of working in hotspots. And in general, ANSA, Italian agency, never missed a meeting with you, and they're our permanent guests. Mr. Poli, you have the floor.
Grazie. Buonasera, Presidente. Grazie per
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. President. Thank you for organizing this meeting. I'd like to ask you a question about the latest events in Ukraine. Secretary General of NATO, Mr. Stoltenberg, suggested that Ukraine be given an opportunity to strike the Russian territory using the weapons procured from Europe. Some European countries agreed with this notion, including the United States. Not all of them, but the United States are also close to it. Still, some countries are holding discussions about sending military instructors and counselors. I'd like to ask you to comment on these two decisions. What will be Russian response to that? Thank you. As for counselors and instructors and their presence there is nothing new. They're already present on the Ukrainian territory. Unfortunately for them, they're incurring losses. I know that for sure. It's not done targetedly, but it just happens. But the European countries and the United States prefer to keep that silent. Secondly, as for high-precision, long-range weapons, I think we need to break this topic down into two. First, conventional arms, multiple launch rocket systems of 70-kilometer range or so. They have been used for a very long time. Indeed, the Ukrainian servicemen can do that on their own. Now, as for high-tech, modern, high-precision, precision-guided, long-range weapons, such as Storm Shadow of UK or ATACMS of the US, or the French missiles as well. Well, and it bears repeating, since I've said it before when I traveled to Central Asian countries. ATACMS, 300 kilometers range. How are they used? How are they transferred? Well, they've transferred the missile system. It was given by Pentagon, by the US. How it is used? The Ukrainian servicemen cannot independently conduct a strike with this missile. They're technologically incapable of doing it. For that, they require satellite reconnaissance, intelligence, and based on that intelligence data, this is US satellite intelligence, they need to put in the flight task, the flight mission of the missile, and later put it into the missile system. And the serviceman standing next to the missile is doing that simply automatically. He's just pushing the buttons. He mustn't even know what happens next. What could be the participation of the Ukrainian servicemen? Not those who are typing the buttons, but higher. They can choose the target. They can say what's the priority target for them. But they do not decide whether to strike this target or not. Because, yet again, the flight mission of the missile is basically typed in only by those who are providing the weapons. If it's ATACMS, it's done by Pentagon. Storm Shadow is done by the UK. It's even simpler sometimes because the flight mission is typed in automatically without the servicemen on the ground. It's done automatically by the UK then. That's it. And when the Bundeswehr officers were thinking whether to strike the Crimean Bridge or any other facilities, well, they were thinking for themselves, right? It wasn't done for them. That's what they were going to do. And the same applies to the French specialists. So it is done by the Western specialists. Therefore, we foster no illusion about that. Well, how are we to respond? Naturally, we'll improve our anti-missile defense systems. Air defense systems will destroy these incoming missiles. Second, we're thinking that if someone believes it possible to provide such weapons to the military, to the war zone in order to conduct strikes against our territory and to create issues for us, then why don't we have an opportunity to provide the same class of weapons to those regions of the world where the strikes will be conducted against sensitive facilities of those countries who are doing that against Russia? Therefore, the response might be asymmetrical, and we will think about that. Number 3, such actions, well, they've deteriorated, they've change the situation for the worse, and they will continue to deteriorate the international situation and undermine international security. In the end, if we see that such countries are engaged in the war against the Russian Federation, and that is a direct participation in the war against the Russian Federation, we leave ourselves the right to respond the same way. It's a path towards very serious issues. I think that's it. If you have any other follow-up questions, I think that I'm unlikely to add something else. Any other questions, Mr. Pauly? Or you've heard everything you wanted? I have yet another question, but I don't know whether it's the right moment to ask it. There won't be any other moment. We'll just leave now, so you should ask. I wanted to ask you a question about Italy, if I may. Italy supports Ukraine politically and militarily. But it also makes statements that Italy is not in the state of war with Russia. If you could please comment on the position of the Italian leadership. We see the position of the Italian government is more moderate than the policy of many other European countries. And we pay attention to it, and we give it the necessary evaluation then. We see that there is no caveman Russophobia being spurred on in Italy, and we keep that in mind as well. We expect that in Italy, maybe, after the situation would be turning for the better in the Ukrainian region, well, maybe our relations will bounce back and possibly even faster than with any other European country. Thank you, Mr. Pauly. Next, we have Korea, Digital Development Executive Director, Mr. Park Son-hoon.
네, 감사합니다. 예. 러시아는 극동 개발에 있어서 한국을 비롯한 동북아시아 국가들과 긴밀하게 협력해왔습니다. 대통령께서는 지난해 이동훈
Russia is cooperating with North Korea in development of the Far East, and in a great fashion.
지기 여건 속에서 러시아가 한국-러시아 관계를 어떻게 관리하고 발전시켜 나가실지 좀 설명 부탁드립니다.
When the South Korean ambassador provided you with his credentials, you said that there could be development of relations. What is the outlook for that? You know, just like in our relations with Italy, we see that there is no Russophobic sentiment in the work of the leadership of the Republic of Korea. There are no direct supplies of munition to the conflict zone, and we highly appreciate that. But we can also see that there are certain attempts of sales to the U.S. companies to further repurpose it for the Ukrainian region, and we are closely following that. However, we truly hope that Russian-South Korean relations will not deteriorate, considering our interest in the development of bilateral relations in terms of the Korean Peninsula in general. Unfortunately, everything that's happening has a negative impact on trade and economic ties. But we truly hope that the foundation laid in the previous decades, the level of our relations, will be maintained at least partially in order to have the chance to rebuild it in the future. Today, unfortunately, many spheres of our cooperation have been discontinued by the Republic of Korea. They've created certain issues, and we're truly sorry. We're working with other countries. Though we could have continued to work with the Republic of Korea, but it's not our choice, it's the choice of the Korean leadership. But as for us, our door is open. We're prepared for it. Thank you very much, Mr. Park, for your question. Mr. Putin, if you would allow me, I'd like a question on behalf of TASS News Agency. Yes, please go ahead. I would like us to go back to the Russian economy. You know, this is just like, as people say, please keep talking about it. You spoke about the current state of economy, but there were, if you remember, there were people who said that the Russian economy is in tatters. And then they were sanctioned multiple times, hundreds of sanctions. Now it's 3 years of the special military operation. What's the future outlook for Russian economy? Is it just as wonderful as the current state? What do you think?
Some of our ill-wishers believe that those multiple sanctions, 16 or 17,000, is unprecedented. There's no other country of the world against which as many sanctions would have been slapped. Certainly, these sanctions are an impediment. But those ill-wishers estimate that in the mid-term, this will have a deleterious effect on the Russian economy in this or that way. And there are grounds to that claim. And those who believe that have grounds for that, especially as far as high-tech and other domains are concerned, microelectronics, AI, everyone knows, you know, the problematic domains, as it were. But there is a but coming. You know, even during the best years of our relations with the so-called collective West, some of the COCOM sanctions were never annulled or cancelled, so restrictions remained in place. And I have every reason to believe that, you know, expecting close cooperation in the most sensitive issues is not something that would have happened. We shouldn't have expected that to happen in the first place. Of course, issues do come up, but strange as it may sound, even to us, we rise up to the task and overcome. We used to buy many things from abroad, but then we run into an obstacle. We can no longer buy some things. We've got to think, to use our brains. We have to look and turn to our producers, our designers, and they are not simply replacing those who have withdrawn from our market. I'm talking about the Western producers, but they are picking that up, taking the relay, as it were, and replace them with their production. This is the effect our ill-wishers did not expect, nor did we expect that ourselves. You know, I'm not gonna say what domain it is, but, you know, there was something they bought from France, like a cistern or something. The metalwork was quite complicated. Then the supplies stopped. I asked, what did you do? They set up a production facility in Nizhny Novgorod and they replaced that. And now it's 3 times cheaper than it used to be when it was imported from France. And this is a real-life example, and it happens across many industries. Hence, the growth we're experiencing. The growth of 3.4% in our GDP. Of course, this growth will run into certain limits. These new niches currently occupied by Russian producers and the subsequent steps in developing the niches the European and Western producers have left. All of that is going to run into limits, into certain restrictions. So currently, we've set some strategic objectives. And one of the objectives we have set forth is technological independence. We used to pursue this path in the past, and we are going to continue along this path. We will invest resources so that we can catch up and maybe take a leap forward, you know, maybe jump forward in technological matters. Whether we'll succeed, I cannot tell you right now, but we're optimistic. I think we will be successful. And especially if everything changes and we, you know, if we get cheap, high-tech goods, then maybe the economic actors will switch back to Western producers that provide goods at a good price and of high quality. But if it does not happen, we will have to do that on our own. Maybe we'll have to revise our forecasts further into the future. You know, there's one example I always cite. There is the MS-21 aircraft we're producing, and there is air wing. It's not just metal, but also some reinforcement. The U.S. administration has slapped some sanctions on that, saying that there are some dual-use materials involved. But, you know, there's no dual use. It's just a competitor for Boeing 737. It's a mid-range, mid-haul aircraft. And we've managed to replace those reinforcements we used to get from the U.S. It's taken us 2 years longer, but still, I do not doubt that we will succeed, but it's all about the time that it's going to take us. Of course, the deadlines are important because there is competition. We are fully cognizant of that. We'll try to stay ahead. But I wouldn't say there are some critical difficulties involved in overcoming the sanctions, and I do hope that that will be that's going to be the case going forward. And it's only logical to give the floor to a representative of the country that's leading in terms of slapping sanctions. There are 3,500 sanctions. We have News Director for Europe and Africa at the Associated Press, James Jordan. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, President Putin, for this opportunity to address you directly. Over 2 years ago, you sent Russian troops into Ukraine, as you say, to protect Russians and Russian speakers in the Donbass region and to keep NATO from your country's eastern border. Since then, thousands have died on both sides, and the fighting has even come to some regions of Russia. In the last few hours, it's been confirmed to the Associated Press by a Western official that Ukraine has used US weapons on Russian soil in the last few days. Do you see this as a further provocation, to follow on from my colleague from ANSA's question? Could you sum up for us what you feel Moscow has achieved in the last 2 years? And how does the fighting stop?
The first thing we did was to perform our duty to the first thing we did was to perform our duty to the people that had been suffering the coup d'etat and the ensuing hostilities unfolding in the southeast part of Ukraine. We recognized the rights of the people living in these territories to protect their interests, to protect their lives and the lives of their children. And in my view, this is the most important thing. We have also demonstrated both to ourselves and to the world at large that we're not just talking about protecting our interests, but also walking the walk, and we will continue to do that regardless of what happens. and everyone will have to take that into account. As far as the second part of your question is concerned, what needs to be done for the fighting to stop in Ukraine? As a representative of the US, I can tell you something I once told President Biden. Some time ago, he sent a letter to me, and I sent a letter to him. In response, I said, if you want the fighting in Ukraine to stop, stop providing weapons. And, you know, it's going to take us 2, maximum 3 months for the fighting to stop. That's the first thing. Secondly, we call on everyone not to hamper the peace process. Distinguished Mr. Jordan, I have to remind you of what was happening at the end of 2022. We did reach an agreement with Ukraine. We were willing to sign an agreement with them, which responded to a number of important issues. The first issue was ensuring the security of Ukraine. And in the draft agreement, Ukraine entered such a formula that said that Ukraine was not a NATO member, that it was a neutral state, but the security guarantees were formulated in such a way that it was very close to the formulas used in the Washington Treaty, Article 4, Article 5. I do not think there is any need for me to go into detail, but that basically meant that all those who signed, the signatories, assumed the responsibility to provide assistance to Ukraine. It was a difficult decision for us. I said we had to give it some thought, but I said we were willing to contemplate that. And the same applied to the Russian interest, because the neutral status of Ukraine met the interests of Russia, the block-free status, some restrictions on weapons, and this is something Russia is interested in. Moreover, we spoke about denazifying Ukraine. And I was very surprised when the questions started coming on what denazifying actually meant. Denazifying involves a legal ban on Nazi propaganda. Strange as it may sound, we managed to find common ground here too, just as we managed to find common ground with a view to finding a peaceful resolution to this crisis situation. And if the head of the negotiating team from Ukraine, he put his signature to the agreement, he initialed the document, and that probably means that Ukraine, on the whole, was okay with that draft agreement. And if we gave our consent to that, that meant that we were okay with that agreement as well. I would hate to put you on the spot, but a rhetorical question nonetheless. Why did Mr. Johnson come to Kiev? Why did he recommend throwing that draft agreement to the dustbin? Why did he put the goal before the Ukrainian counterparts to seek a victory in the battlefield, to seek a strategic defeat of Russia? Ukraine and its officials have publicly stated that had they signed the agreement, the war would have been over at the end of 2022. It's not we who are saying that. It's the words of the Ukrainian officials in Kiev, and they say that publicly. So a rhetorical question. Why did someone need to prevent us from signing this peace treaty with Ukraine? I can only speculate. Someone wanted to secure some additional objectives they set forth for themselves on their Russian foreign policy track. They wanted to push Russia towards collapse. They wanted to secure Russia's strategic defeat, no matter the price. So you asked the question. I do hope that I've given you a comprehensive answer. And when you have the opportunity to talk to the leadership of your country, do ask them this question. Why did you prevent the peace treaty between Russia and Ukraine from being signed? I've only shared my speculations with you. Maybe there's another answer. Maybe there is an official, comprehensive answer to that question. I cannot speak for my colleagues in the UK or the US, but Mr. Johnson did come, and maybe he did come not just of his own volition, he did that with the support of the US administration, and I do not doubt that this is what happened.
Thank you, Mr. President. With your permission, may I ask a very brief other question away from Ukraine regarding the American reporter Evan Gershkovich, who's been in custody for more than a year now. There's been no evidence made public about what crimes he may have committed. Can you give us the latest on any talks that might be happening with the US as regards his release and when we might expect to see him?
Вы знаете, вы считаете, что он ни в чем не виновен?
You know, you think he is not guilty of anything. The Russian law enforcement agencies and the Russian special services believe that he committed an illegal act of espionage. I'm not going to go into detail right now. I'm aware that the US administration is truly undertaking energetic steps to secure his liberation. But these matters are not addressed through the media outlets. They prefer to be addressed in a very calm, professional manner through the dialogue between the special services. And of course, they have to be addressed on the basis of reciprocity, inclusively, and the competent bodies of Russia and the US are in contact on this matter. Thank you, Mr. Jordan. And next, over to Turkey, Deputy Director General, Editor-in-Chief of Anadolu News Agency, Yusuf Ozhan. Over to you, Mr. Ozhan, your question.
Thank you so much for having us today here, Mr. President. Actually, I'd like to ask a question, a follow-up question on the question that I posed 3 years ago, again, during the anniversary of the Economic Forum. It was over Zoom. It's happy to see you in face-to-face. It is about the Gaza, war in Gaza right now. Millions of people around the world are opposing the attacks against the Gazan people, which is amount to the level of genocide right now. And what Russia has or is intent to play a role in the solution of the situation right now in Gaza? And do you have any intention to also get the Security Council in motion? Because the people, not only the Gazan people, but the Palestinian people in general, and the people of different origins, religion, ethnicity, free from any identity backgrounds, the people of the world are actually asking for the big powers to finish what is happening right now on the ground in Gaza. Thank you.
The first thing I would like to point out is that we are certainly against terrorism in all its forms, any manifestations. We are against attacks against civilians whenever and wherever that happens, and in any no matter in what country it happens. But what's currently happening in Gaza in response to the terrorist attack in Israel, well, it doesn't resemble a war very much. It's total extermination of civilian population. I can only reiterate Russia's official position on this issue. We believe this is the outcome of the U.S. policy, because the U.S. has monopolized the Israeli-Palestinian settlement, pushing all the previously established mechanisms aside, discarding those mechanisms, collective mechanisms, which were set up precisely for the purpose of finding a solution to this issue. Maybe some in the administration believed that the fewer opinions were put forth, the quicker it's going to be to secure an agreement, but the practice has disproved that point. Secondly, addressing this matter through some material handouts is not going to yield the result that's required. We've spoken about that. We doubt that the resolution of political issues related to the future of a Palestinian nation can be replaced by economic benefits.
There should be the right conditions in order to solve certain issues. Still, they need to be solved in their essence. You need to solve the political matters. What is the main one of them? Is that creation of the two states as stipulated initially, when the UN decided to create two states on that territory, the Palestine state and the state of Israel. Therefore, without solving the key issues, as it seems to me, it would be impossible, the matter in its essence. It would be hardly possible. I have to say that the Russian position is a principled one in this regard. It does not change with time nor the situation. We have long recognized the Palestine state as such during the Soviet times. In this sense, our position remains unchanged. We know that President Erdogan is very active in order to find a solution to this long-standing issue, a very pressing issue. And considering the standing of President Erdogan in the region, in the world, and in the Islamic world, we truly hope that he would make a significant contribution. As for us, we're prepared to do everything in our power in order to solve this situation. By that, I mean our relations that we've built with the State of Israel throughout the past decades. Mr. Oskan, do you have a second question? Oh, well, you have the chance.
Yeah, I can follow up on that. Thanks for your answer. Sorry. Also, another question would be regarding the Turkey and Russia relations. You've been in negotiations over the course of last 10 years, and one of the mega projects that Turkey and Russia have achieved together was the building of the nuclear power plant in Akkuyu. So for the future, now, is there any development on Russian side regarding the production or the construction project of the gas center that was being discussed in the recent years? Is there any news from the Russian side about that? Or are there any other future project that is being discussed between the two countries? Thank you.
As for Akkuyu, everything is going according to the plan. It's all going according to the timeline. We're seeing the deadlines executed. A lot of people are working, and the construction, the workers are being engaged from Turkey, because there is a lot of construction work being done. Our specialists are working in Turkey. We're thankful to the Turkish government for the conditions that were provided for this work. The first unit is being finalized. However, it's all going according to the plan on all units. As for hydrocarbons, and I can repeat, actually, incidentally, we're not just building the station, the power plant. We're also building talent. We're prepared to take over the spent fuel. We're creating the whole system. It's a new sphere of economy and energy of Turkey. And President Erdogan has made a strategic choice, and I think it's quite a right one. It helps get rid of the hydrocarbon dependency as well. We have a reliable partnership. We're doing our work. As for the gas hub, the gas center, yes, we're working on it. We're thinking about it with Gazprom, with Belarus, and with other partners. But I'll try to explain. It's not just a gas storage, gas holder. It's a platform. It's an operator to trade in gas for Europe, primarily. But I wanted to point the following thing out. We've seen, well, we're guarding Blue Stream that leads to Turkey through the Black Sea, and that provides Turkey with gas, as well as Turk Stream that provides gas to Europe as well. But we have to guard both of these pipelines that go down the bottom of the Black Sea, because the Ukrainian armed forces are making attempts to strike them and to destroy them. At least the ships that are guarding them are being constantly attacked. And quite recently, the latest thing that happened, I think 7 or 8 days ago, Ukrainian drones made an attempt to attack at a gas pumping station situated on the shore of the Black Sea that is pumping gas to Turkey. Incidentally, we'd like to point it out to you. Turkey has some cooperation with Ukraine. At the same time, Ukraine is trying to strike the gas pipelines providing gas to Turkey. This is not a joke, not an exaggeration. 2 drones were jammed by the Russian electronic warfare troops, and they were trying to strike the gas pumping station on the Black Shore. I'm not inventing something here. That's what happened. Please inform our friend, President Erdogan, that what's happening in reality. And the ships that are guarding this gas transportation system that is at the bottom of the Black Sea are constantly attacked by the drones, by the water drones that are procured by the European countries to Ukraine, incidentally. And they're attacking our boats that are guarding these 2 pipeline systems. I think we need to be more vocal about it and to be more clear. But as for propaganda that our Spanish friend complained so much about, we're not always succeeding in that. But that's what's really happening all the time. But bilateral relations are developing rather successfully, and our trade is growing. However, I'm taking a look at what's happening. And it seems to me that the economic part of the government of Turkey recently have been focusing on receiving investments and loans, receiving grants. From the Western financial institutions. Possibly it's all right. Maybe all right. But if it will have limitations on trade and economic ties with Russia, then I think that the loss for the Turkish economy will be greater than the gain, and I think there is such a possibility. But it's a sensitive matter. Maybe it requires a separate discussion. We're just simply looking at the figures, at the macroeconomic indicators. they require special attention from the Turkish government right now, but I don't want to go into detail on that, though I know them very well. I'm very well read on that. I know what's happening there. Thank you very much, Mr. Osan.
Владимир Владимирович, вы совсем недавно были с государственным визитом трехдневным.
President Putin, you've traveled for 3 days to Uzbekistan, and you've mentioned that this visit was a very fruitful one, a very successful one. And now you have a guest from Tashkent who came here, Mr. Kuchimov, Director General of the National News Agency, Uzbekistan. Mr. Kuchimov, you have the floor. Thank you. Mr. Putin, during the recent negotiations in Tashkent, you, with Mr. Mirziyoyev, you have exchanged opinions on the relevant international issues. For us in Uzbekistan, it's very important that we have peace and stability in the neighboring country of Afghanistan. Unfortunately, we see that the matters of Ukraine have completely substituted Afghanistan, though it's not less pressing. Though there is an objective need to build interaction with the new authorities of Afghanistan and to help solve the social and economic issues of the long-suffering Afghan nation. Moreover, we can see the strive of the new authorities, that is Taliban, to establish peace in their country and to constructively cooperate with all states. Therefore, here comes my question. How important it is for the Russian Federation to support ties with Afghanistan? Is the Afghanistan playing an important role in Russian politics and policy? And what's your take on the situation in that country? First, I'd like to confirm that my visit to Uzbekistan was indeed very thoroughly prepared and very successful and effective, yielded great results. And I don't think that it has been paralleled yet. Upon the initiative of President Mirziyoyev, we did not only travel to Uzbekistan upon the invitation of the president with a great governmental delegation, but we were also simultaneously holding a meeting of the heads of regions. It just happened so that half of the Russian government traveled out to Tashkent, and a tremendous number of heads of regions of the Russian Federation as well. Some leaders of the Russian regions were happy to talk to the new members of the government of the Russian Federation in Tashkent as well. They were working together in wonderful lockstep, and it was quite a surprise for me as well. We were discussing the matters of the issue of Ukraine, and naturally President Mirziyoyev is very actively promoting a peaceful settlement of the Ukrainian crisis. He spoke multiple times about the concerns of Uzbekistan due to what's happening in Ukraine. We're thankful to the president for the fact that the Uzbekistan policy is very neutral in its nature, very well-balanced. As for Afghanistan, we also spoke about that. The issue that Uzbekistan is facing is the matter of finding an entry to the global, to the world ocean, to the sea. So it's a matter of logistics through the territory of Afghanistan as well. Pipeline transportation, railroad transportation, car transportation, providing energy and electric power and so on. Naturally, for Uzbekistan and for us, it's very important that there is stability in Afghanistan. We have always believed that we need to follow the reality. The Taliban control the power, are in power in Afghanistan, and naturally, we need to strive to achieve all agreements at the level of the United Nations to be implemented so There will be inclusive power, including all ethnic groups of Afghanistan. It's a very delicate matter, a very important one, but we need to build relations with the government of Taliban. In general, we have contacts, and I know that Uzbekistan is doing it as well. Well, we have to move forward. We need to build relations with a neighboring country, especially since Uzbekistan has a very lengthy border with that country. And you need to ensure security as well, and to develop logistics. We have agreed that we'll work on that together and we'll study the opportunities there. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Kuchimov. And our Far Eastern neighbor, Executive Director of Kyoto News Agency, Toshimitsu Sawai. Mr. Sawai is a very seasoned international journalist with great experience. Throughout his time, he worked as a correspondent in different parts of the world, for example, in Kenya, Thailand, Pakistan, the US. Mr. Sawai, please, you have the floor.
Vladimir Vladimirovich, 今日はこのような機会を作っていただきましてありがとうございました。
Thank you so much, Mr. President, that you have given me a valuable opportunity to ask you a question. Right now, in the Far Eastern region, there are many matters that are of concern for Japan. First and foremost, that's the territorial dispute with Russia. Second, military cooperation between Russia and the North Korea that is being strengthened right now. These two issues that we're facing in Japan. As for territorial disputes and the territorial issues, my question is the following. In Khabarovsk this year, you said that you will absolutely travel to these 4 disputed Kuril islands. Do you have any specific plans, a timeline for that visit? What do you think? The situation right now is that the negotiations are put on hold. And if you visit these territories, then our bilateral relations will be harmed yet again. If you could please share what are your plans in that regard? As for Russian-Japanese talks and their re-establishment during the time of the special military operation in Ukraine, these negotiations were discontinued. And since then, the descendants of the former citizens of those islands cannot go back to visit the graves of their forefathers. Our relations with Japan were developing in a rather sustained manner. Of course, there were many issues, especially the ones that regarded the key issue in our relations, that is the peace treaty. Understandably, this peace treaty could not have been achieved without solving the issues that had to do with the Kuril Island. We were fully aware of that back in the 50s, and you and I know it very well, that the Soviet government made a decision, I think it was done in 1956, a declaration was signed that the Soviet Union is prepared to transfer 2 out of these isles, out of the chain of islands. But the basis for that wasn't mentioned, the reasoning for that, and the sovereignty was also not mentioned. And some other conditions, possibly the payments, were not mentioned. However, the very idea of a transfer was stipulated in that declaration. Moreover, it was ratified by the Supreme Council of the USSR. For some reason, the Japanese side refused to implement these agreements. Hence, the Soviet Union also de-ratified that. Per request of the Japanese side, we went back to the review of these matters. It was a complex dialogue, but still it took place. Now you mentioned several issues. Visiting the Isles. The Russian Federation believes that this is a part of the sovereign territory of Russia. Therefore, I don't see why I should shy away from visiting one of the territories of the Russian Federation. Number one. Second, why do we believe that? Because there were relevant documents that were signed in the United States as well by the two delegations of the two countries. It was one of the results of the Second World War. And the results of the Second World War are not to be revised. It doesn't mean that there were no opportunities to agree. This is a very delicate matter. However, it's not a black and white issue. It's much more complex.
But we're not shy to engage in a dialogue on this matter. So first, I see no grounds for me that would prevent me from visiting the Isles. But to be honest, so far, I have not had that in my plans, because currently I'm looking into other matters. But you have just said that my visit there would entail difficulties in drafting a peace treaty. Sir, what about Japan's declaration that it is joining the attempts at securing Russia's strategic defeat? What of it? Does it constitute a barrier in the way of negotiations on a peace treaty? Japan has joined the calls to carry out a strategic defeat against Russia. Do you think that is the good strategy to pursue when striving for a peace treaty? Do you think my hypothetical intention to visit the Isles is more serious than the Japanese government's declaration of its intent to secure Russia's strategic defeat in the battlefield? I do understand that this is not your personal question. It's been dictated by the editorial policy of your news agency, but I think you should ask your leadership that question. Moreover, we see that Japan is biased as far as the Ukrainian crisis is concerned. As of now, currently there are no conditions in place for Russia and Japan to continue their dialogue on a peace treaty. We do not refuse to engage in such a dialogue, but only once the requisite conditions have been created, especially from the Japanese side. We're not doing anything in our bilateral relations that would complicate our dialogue with Japan. Not a single thing. Everything that has been done by Japan. Now, moving on to Russia's relations with the with North Korea, with the DPRK. There can be different views in that regard. I think the DPRK has on multiple occasions demonstrated its willingness to achieve an agreement, in particular with the US, and I think it's precisely this willingness that served as the impetus for the meeting between former US President Donald Trump and Mr. Kim Jong-un. Moreover, the Americans and the North Koreans agreed that the latter were not going to carry out nuclear tests. There was an agreement on shutting down the nuclear testing site, and that had to be reciprocated by some steps by the US in the banking sector. But it was not just an agreement. This agreement was implemented, but what did happen as a result? The US unilaterally violated these agreements, doing that directly and overtly. So what would prevent us from developing relations with a country with which we have a contiguous border? You know, there are some things that make me ask questions. In the past, we supported some measures with regard to North Korea in particular, and the field of labor migration. You know, you all work in the information field. You are immersed in this material, as it were, well-versed in this field. So why did we support those measures? What about labor migrants? What kind of a threat do they pose? We allegedly care about the environment, some birds, some sea animals. And what about people dying of hunger? Not because they are bellicose or belligerent. It's civilians, peaceful citizens of a country we're talking about. But we prevent them from getting a job, limit their opportunities in terms of securing a job to feed their families. That's just bizarre. Well, I'm just currently speaking in an abstract fashion, not in any relation to what is currently happening. I think this is what's going to keep happening across the world. If anyone is threatened, someone is threatened and they have to respond. Had there been no threat in the first place, then the difficulties wouldn't simply not arise. I think the nuclear issue is a response to these constant threats. Now, as for our relations with North Korea, I can tell you that we will pursue this relationship because they are our neighbors, whether others like that or not. Thank you. Mr. President, Sami Anakul from Reuters asks for the floor.
Yes, hi. I have two questions. I have a follow-up question on Gaza. You know, the war has been going on for 8 months. Prime Minister Netanyahu said he won't stop until he eradicates Hamas. Yet, you know, it's still there. So how do you see the scenario? How do you see this conflict unfolding? And given your diplomatic, you know, relations and clout with the Palestinian Authority, with Hamas, even with the Israeli, I don't know, it's a bit strained, but with Gulf Arab countries, do you think of playing a leading role in mediating an end to the conflict based on a two-state solution as the Madrid conference? And do you really believe that there is hope for a Palestinian state? This is one, and then I'll follow.
I think there is hope. In particular, due to the fact that both in the US and in Israel there are people who advocate a two-state solution. There are people there who believe this is precisely the path to pursue, namely to set up two sovereign states. And there are people who believe that this path is going to lead us to peace. This is what will allow finding the peace formula. As for Russia playing a leading role, I don't think we need to do that, because there are many players who are involved in that conflict and who have a great deal of influence with the developments. But making a contribution to finding a solution is something we could do given the relationships we have fostered over the recent decades with Israel, and also given the relations we have traditionally had with the Islamic world, with the Arab world. These relations are based on trust. But I think the main contribution needs to come from the countries of the region, and also the regional organizations such as the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, the Arab League, the neighboring countries such as Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf countries, Turkey, as one of the leading players in the Islamic world. And certainly the US. We are not holding on to some extremist position according to which the US has to be excluded from the settlement. That's just impossible. And Israel has to play a role as well. But the golden mean needs to be found. And I reiterate, this can be done given the sentiments in the American society, in Israeli society, and given the sentiment in the Arab world and in the Islamic world. We are trying to do what we can, providing in particular humanitarian assistance. As you're aware, we played a certain role in securing the release of several hostages of Russian origins, and we continue to work pursuing this avenue, working with our partners. You are apt in saying that we've got good relations based on trust, and we've been fostering those relations for decades, but we need to work together rather than trying to monopolize the peace process. That would be harmful, because monopolizing could be a good thing if the one doing the monopolizing stuck to a neutral position, but the monopolizer is incapable of pursuing the neutral position. Sooner or later, it sides with one of the sides and it all falls apart, resulting in the tragedies like the one we are currently witnessing. That's it.
Sorry, about the scenario, how do you see this conflict now, the war in Gaza unfolding? And one last question.
Sure. We have come up with a number of initiatives at the UN Security Council calling for a ceasefire. The US has blocked that, vetoing those initiatives. Had we been working in solidarity, trying to secure an agreement, that would be the positive scenario, but so far it has not succeeded. We directly call for a ceasefire, this initiative and that initiative, you know. If we had not been involved in reciprocal vetoes, rather trying to find a solution, working together, then that would probably be the path towards finding a solution to this problem. And another question you wanted to ask?
Just my question is that, going back to Ukraine, what would trigger a nuclear war and how close are we to that risk?
Вы знаете, вот нас все время пытаются обвинять, что...
You know, there are always accusations flung at us that we are nuclear cyber rattling, but am I the one asking the question about the possible nuclear war? You were the one to ask the question. You are pushing me towards this question, and then you'll say that I've been, you know, brandishing the nuclear truncheon. You know, this is a very grave subject. The US is the only country to have used nuclear weapons during the Second World War. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, 20 kilotons. Our tactical nuclear weapons is 75 kilotons, just the tactical nuclear weapons. So let's not push the situation towards the point when even a threat is involved, let alone the use of nuclear weapons. For some reason, the West believes that Russia is never going to resort to that. But we've got the nuclear doctrine in place. Have a look at it. What does it say? It says that someone else's actions threaten our sovereignty or territorial integrity, then we believe we have the right to use all the tools at our disposal. And no one should take that lightly or superficially. There needs to be a professional view of that. And I am hopeful that everyone across the world is gonna perceive that in this fashion when addressing such issues. Thank you, Samir. Thank you, Madam Nehul. Next, in an agency, Mr. Nadiri is asking for the opportunity to ask another question. Go ahead, please. God help us, it's the third hour that we are continuing our conversation. In your statements, you spoke about sanctions. You have also spoke about Iran's accession to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as well as to the BRICS Association. With a view to achieving a multipolar world, my question is as follows. What's your view of the future world order? Given the desires and will of different independent countries, do you think monopoly is going to be preserved as well as a unipolar world?
Вы знаете, ведь что произошло? Мы много раз об этом говорили.
You know, we have spoken about that on many occasions, and you know that better than anyone. The USSR collapsed. Well, it was dissolved. Whether it was destroyed or not, that's up for speculation, but it happened, and only one superpower remained, and it thought that it could rest on its laurels at the helm of the whole world, dictating their will to everyone. But the world is a complex system. It's developing rapidly with new power poles emerging. One of the Western European politicians, and it was not me, I want everyone to understand that, he said, all European countries are small countries, but not all of them have come to realize that yet. Look at Asia and its development. China, 1.5 billion people. India has probably overtaken that in terms of population. Other Asian countries are developing at breakneck pace in Southeast Asia and Bangladesh, Pakistan, Indonesia. The pace of development is enormous. The population is growing. And judging by that, the trend points to a shift in developmental patterns towards Asia. Currently, there are several processes afoot in that part of the world. They are catching up in terms of economic growth, and also catching up in the standards of living. This will inevitably result in the shifts in the world configuration. Right now, it's impossible to talk about any kind of monopoly. Monopoly is no longer there, without a doubt. The world can only exist in its diversity. If complete monopoly is achieved, it's going to be terrible, just as in nature. In politics, the world needs to be a diverse place. I do not know whether that's a good thing for the US. I mean, such a monopoly that emerged after the collapse of the USSR, because that required additional efforts on the part of the US. Just have a look at the statistics. Totally, the US defense expenditure is superior to that of all other countries' defense expenditure combined. So you can sum up all the defense expenses of all countries across the world. It's still going to be inferior to the defense expenditure of the US, because loads of money are funneled into supporting foreign bases. Very often I get the question, how can you support the establishment of such modern weaponry, such as the gliding blocks of the avant-garde system? The thing is, we are concentrating our financial and administrative resources in key areas, whereas the US needs to spend a whole load of money on supporting its already expansive armed forces across the world, the foreign bases. Corruption is flaring, the expenses are great. I'm not accusing anyone. We've got a lot of corruption too, your countries too, but there is also a lot of corruption in the US because a lot of money can be stolen when it's allocated for supporting what's there. A lot of money, a lot of resources are funneled into supporting the imperial status of the US. Does it benefit the American citizens? I don't think so. On the contrary, it pushes the US down the ladder. And the experts in the US know that, and they say and point that out publicly. I read them. The question is how fast that is happening, how fast the US is going to be dethroned. If they were smart people, then they would read what their experts write, and they would correct course, and they would have stayed on the Olympus for longer.
However, the current leadership would like to hold on to this imperial standing at any cost, and that is only detrimental to themselves. Still, the changes are taking place. They're unavoidable. They're already underway. There is no unipolar world anymore. I think that the task for all of us, the United States, Russia, Europe, Asia, so that would have an understanding of all of it, but would not come to an extreme, what our colleague from the UK spoke about. And for us to understand that and to moderate our ambition and not to try and agree with each other and not to try and make someone abandon agreements, then the world will change, but without possible catastrophes that are so scary for everyone.
Sorry. امروز من یه سوال دیگه هم داشتم اون که امروز
Today, well, I had yet another question.
قطعنامه‌ای رو علیه
That the IAEA issued a document against the Islamic Republic of Iran, considering that right now Iran considering that the U.S. stepped out of the nuclear deal with 5 participants, and that deal was adopted yet again. And I think a certain agency or a certain body should be used that would be more professional and competent to possibly use it as a weapon. What do you think this situation has to do with? I don't think I quite understood your question. However, Iran fully executed its obligations under the well-known deal that you've just mentioned. There could be no grievances against Iran in this regard. The United States unilaterally decided to withdraw from that deal, and the Europeans continued to demand that Iran execute fully its obligations. Well, please forgive me, but this is some garbage and absurd. The Iran did not step out. Well, former President Trump decided to withdraw from the deal. And the Europeans said, oh, yes, that's not quite right that the U.S. stepped out, but you, Iranians, you observe it all. Why would they do that? Well, it just sounds to me a little crude in Russian, but if the key actor stepped out of the deal, why should Iran bear such a burden of observing the demands? we asked Iran and we tried to convince Iran not to take any sudden moves, not to step out of the deal, not to exacerbate relations with the EU. Well, this is an open secret, but I'll reveal it to you. We were also asking the Iranian leadership to keep calm. It will be even better for you to observe the agreement. But I was thinking to myself, why should Iran observe it if everyone is leaving the deal? But in general, some kind of mechanism should be found that would be stable. It's clear to everyone. Today they sign the deal, tomorrow they leave it. How can we work with that? We're always being told that trust is so important, but where is the trust in here? It cannot come from nowhere. One administration left and the other came in, and all of the previous obligations are thrown out of the window. Just like today. Everyone is thinking about their own topics, and I'm thinking about mine. Our colleague from the United States asked about possible agreements with Ukraine. Well, yes, we have come to almost to sign an agreement with Ukraine. Well, at the behest of the US and the UK, it was all thrown out. And how can we agree today? How we can negotiate today? The current leadership of Ukraine decided not to be elected. Now it's a big question. Now there is Article 103 of the Ukrainian Constitution, and it says that the president is elected for 5 years only. And there is Article 83 of the Ukrainian Constitution, and it stipulates that during the martial law, the mandate of the parliament is extended. As for the extension of the presidential mandate, well, nothing is said. Nothing. There is a law that explains the status of the martial law. And it says that the mandate is transferred to the parliament, and that the elections of the president during the martial law are not being held. The presidential elections are not being held, but it doesn't mean that their results are extended. See? It's not written there. What's written is that the elections are not held. The presidential elections are not held, but their mandate is not extended. It's not mentioned. If it's not written on paper, it doesn't exist. On the contrary, there is Article 109 of the Penal Code of the Ukraine, and it stipulates that it's called a seizure of power. Who do we sign an agreement with? Nevertheless, it all can be solved. We can negotiate on everything. If the authority is being transferred to the Speaker of Parliament, well, it's just a matter of goodwill of signing the treaty. We'll find someone to sign it with. It's not a problem. As for Iran, I agree with you. We would need some kind of a tool. It seems it needs to be elaborated anew. That would be a legitimate one and reliable, so that all participants of this process wouldn't feel in danger of the fact that all previous conditions will be destroyed tomorrow, and one of the parties, of contracting parties, will bear the full responsibility of not observing something that was never violated.
نظر شما در مورد اقدام امروز آژانس بین‌المللی انرژی اتمی.
Yes, as for the current actions of the IAEA and the publishing the resolution about the Islamic Republic of Iran, if you could please comment on that. I haven't seen that yet. I need to take a look at it. We have been sitting here for half a day now, so show it to me, please, and I can comment. I'll try to give you an opinion. I cannot, as of now. I haven't seen it yet. Thank you, Mr. Nadri. We're talking for 3 hours now. Shall we wrap it up now? Yes, please. Is there anything that you believe important that we haven't yet mentioned. Germany, please, you have the floor.
Herr Präsident, wir haben jetzt die letzten Stunden.
Mr. President, in the last hours we've been discussing the issues, and we've discussed what do you think needs to be done to solve these issues.
Sie Herrn Außenminister Lavrov zu den G20-Treffen.
The last two times with Minister Lavrov, well, we spoke with him, and during the G20 meeting in Brazil this year. It's been taken over by Brazil. Have you made a decision that you will travel to India to take part in G20?
Да. Ну, я пока не знаю, я этого не исключаю. Я прежде всего, конечно, должен руководствоваться.
First and foremost, I need to the demands of today, as you understand. There are many issues today in Russia as well. Maybe I will travel. Well, maybe not. Well, we all know what kind of world we live in. I'll speak frankly. It will depend on the situation in the country, in the Ukraine, and it will depend on the situation in the world in general. To travel there to listen to smearing against Russia by partners who believe that Russia is an aggressor, well, though they're such themselves, well, it's not so nice. And to create some issues for our Indian friends as well. Well, we've been working in G20 and will continue to do that. Do I need to appear there personally? I do not know yet. We'll live and see, as we say in Russia. Mr. Nadalby, France Press, two short questions. The first question, the U.S. peoples have an interest in asking, will Tucker Carlson will be a moderator on Friday at the plenary session here in State President? Carlson, I don't even know who will be moderating. I really don't know. Mr. Peskov hasn't reported that to me yet. Who will moderate it there? You don't know? Well, he'll report separately. Okay. Yeah, we haven't agreed on that with Mr. Carlson. Second question. It's already getting dark, but there are three flags behind you. Flag of Russia, flag of the Soviet Union, and of the Russian Empire. The flag of Russian Empire is the tallest one. No, no, no. They're all equal in height. Which one do you like the best? The official flag of the Russian Federation, the three-colored flag. It's an official flag of Russia. And second, it's not a political decision of our administration, of the authorities. It's a Gazprom decision. Well, Mr. Miller said to me that he intends to do that, but I can retell you the whole discussion. Well, it's an open secret. And asked why, I said that we have a state flag. He said, well, it's all a part of our history. Nicholas II established an imperial flag. He decided that it should be black, yellow, and white, because these are the colors of the Russian coat of arms. Back in the day, in the 19th century, that was the reasoning. Peter the Great established the state flag, the three colors, the flag of the Soviet Union, especially since the victory over Nazism is connected to it. It also has the right to exist in our history and in our public consciousness. So I did not stand in the way. I said, please, you can do that. It has the logic behind it, a certain reason. You shouldn't look for something that it's not there. You shouldn't look for a certain subtext or something else. You shouldn't look for our imperial ambition. There are none. They are non-existent because the world is changing so fast. Listen, Uzbekistan. Do you know what's the population of Uzbekistan? You don't. What's the population of France right now? A lot. Okay, 60 million, 65 million. Uzbekistan has 37 million. And now, pay attention. Look at the screen, so to speak. they add another million of population every year, a million growth of population in Uzbekistan. With such a rate, they will bypass France very soon. If you get rid of the migrants, well, soon Uzbekistan will be on par with France in terms of population. And I'll explain to you why. If someone suspects that we have some imperial ambitions, please imagine. We'll bring back the Soviet Union and we'll have a prevailing Islamic population. Did it ever come into your mind? You shouldn't invent anything that's not there. We're not against an increase in the Islamic population. We're rather happy that it happens in the Russian Federation now. Some of our predominantly Islamic republics, we have a very good birth rate and we are very happy about it. But what's past is past. The page has been turned and we're looking into the future based on the reality of today. The flags that you see right now is part of our history. You should not invent anything and use these contemplations to shape your opinion about Russia. You should not make an enemy out of Russia. You're only harming yourself with that. You mentioned that Russia wants to attack NATO. Are you dumb? Who invented that? This is garbage, nonsense, and nothing else. But it would have been just pure garbage if they didn't try to dupe their population, that they should cry wolf and say that Russia is trying to attack us and we need to arm ourselves and to send all our weapons to Ukraine. Why is it being done? To maintain their own imperial domination and greatness. Hence the threats and the scary stories for bourgeoisie in Germany and other parts of Europe. There is no such threat. And it could never be. We're defending ourselves in Ukraine. Where are the United States? Over the ocean. And we're here right now. Imagine we would do that in Canada right now, what the US is doing at our threshold right here in the Ukraine or in Mexico. Or we could say right now that the United States now, well, back in the day, they took part of the Mexican territory, and right now they could fight for the return of the territory. That's what the Western countries are trying to do in terms of Russian-Ukrainian crisis. Have you ever considered that? You shouldn't look at the flags. You shouldn't look into the crux of the matter. We have no imperial ambition. Believe me. This is nonsense. Just like the threat of Russia to NATO and European countries. Look at the potential of the NATO and Russian potential. Did you decide that we're crazy? The palace and the flag of the last emperor of France, the flag of Republic, of the flag of Napoleon. But here, please forgive me. When you're here, I didn't see all three right of them. They're just here. This is a private initiative of Mr. Miller, and he has an interest in Russian history. I can repeat it to you once again. It's not connected with anything except with history and paying our dues to the generation who lived with these flags and banners and achieved great success in the development of our state. Thank you. Another short question from Efe. Well, we can sit here till early hours of the morning then. Maybe we can speak later tomorrow. We need to go to Pushkin. Then, no. So, okay. Let's take the last one.
Mañana se celebra, o en unas horas se celebra.
I'll be very short. Tomorrow we are going to celebrate the 80th anniversary of the D-Day. of the U.S. French soldiers. They fought together with Russian soldiers, with Soviet soldiers. Can you rule out that right now Russians, French, and the U.S. can work together and be partners?
Мы не исключаем.
No, we cannot rule that out. It's the U.S. and the Europeans who are ruling that out. We're all for it. We did not introduce any sanctions against Europe. We did not discontinue providing energy to Europe, to Germany. We are being sanctioned here. You said that tomorrow they're going to celebrate 80-year anniversary of the D-Day, of the disembarkation in Normandy.
С огромным уважением.
We have always held our allies in greatest esteem. Both Americans and the British, the French. Incidentally, do they know in France that it was Stalin who insisted on France's presence, and not just presence, but also on France's signing the capitulation pact with Germany? Both the US and the UK were against that. It was Stalin who insisted on France's being there as a victory country when the pact on unconditional surrender was signed with Germany. The French do not remember. Maybe they do not want that, or maybe they do not think much of it, but it's a historical fact, something we've preserved in our archives. We've always had great respect for the France that was fighting and resisting despite German troops marching from Paris. We supported the Marquis and also the Normandy Neman pilots. Our doors are always open to talks, to negotiations and discussions. You have just mentioned that, but it's as if we are not welcome at that holiday, as it were. How many Americans did die in the Second World War? 50, 60,000, and even fewer British citizens died. The number is lower than that of those who died during the First World War. You know, the biggest sacrifice on the altar of this victory were made by the Soviet Union. According to the latest calculation, around 27 million people, out of them around 70% from Russia, the Russian Socialist Federative Soviet Republic. Russia accounts for 70% of those losses. You're asking whether we are willing or not willing, but no one has invited us. The biggest contribution to defeating Nazism, and it's evident, you have you simply have to read Churchill. You know, the biggest contribution comes from the Soviet Union. The biggest contribution to the shared victory over Nazism. And everyone knows that only the most dishonest people are trying to distort these historical facts. Okay, let them be, let them celebrate without us. We, you know, it's not going to do us much damage, but they're saying that the current leadership of Ukraine is going to be there right now, but just listen, how can you celebrate such an important anniversary and the fight against Nazism together with those who are putting the neo-Nazis onto a pedestal, making national heroes out of them? The current symbol of Ukrainian statehood is Bandera, who was one of the major henchmen of Hitler and the territory of Eastern Europe. And it was through the hands of Banderites that thousands of Russians and Poles and Jews were shot dead. He was the closest accomplice of Hitler. Yes, at the end of the war, he sniffed on the wind that victory was escaping from the clutch of Hitler, and he started to search for new allies to the West. And the Germans took note of that. But he was the main collaborationist, and he threw a hand salute, welcoming the Nazis, and he was directly collaborating with them. Back then he was still legitimate, and the head of Ukraine applauded standing a former Nazi at the Canadian Parliament. Do you know about that? Of course, everyone knows about that. But the media of the West, Europe, the US, and Canada were trying to keep it all hush, even though it was a person who fought against the Allies during the Second World War, and everyone stood up and applauded the person who, as they said, had fought against Russia. And who did fight against Russia during the Second World War? It was Hitler and his allies. So the man who got that standing ovation was a former SS soldier. And tomorrow, this very same people are gonna celebrate the D-Day. What are we to make of that? Especially given the fact that Russia is the successor state of the USSR that suffered such heavy losses. Well, they're ashamed to invite that. Okay, we'll survive that. But, that answers your question about who is interested in rebuilding relations and who is not. We are all in favor. Okay, the last question, if you don't mind. Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Okay. Well, who else? Go ahead then, and I'll ask the last question.
Sie das Thema Narzissmus angesprochen haben.
You spoke about Nazism. You're aware that there is a party in Germany that is a source of certain preoccupation among the public and other parties. It's a party that's uncritical about this period of our history, and this party is called Alternative for Germany. And many of their members, many families are currently under constitutional surveillance due to their rhetoric and their actions. The co-chair of that party visited Moscow in 2020, if my memory serves me right. He was invited to the Russian embassy in Berlin, as far as I'm aware. So what do you make of AfD party? And what's your relation and attitude of Russia towards this party, and vice versa of this party towards Russia? Yes, you've mentioned him, the leader of the party. He has been to Moscow, and I think I've met some of the leadership of the party, but we do not have any systemic relations with this party. But currently, what we see is that any alternative to the mainstream position in Germany is viewed as extremist, and everyone is all of a sudden dubbed as the Kremlin's agents. If there is a political force that is criticizing the current leadership, then in a democratic society, I think there are no grounds to all of a sudden declare that political force as an anti-state force, trying to shut it down. When Hitler was thrown into prison after a failed putsch in Bavaria, if I remember correctly, his popularity soared. He was on the ascendant. Before that, he had not been considered as a national politician, but after his arrest, he turned into one. But we see no signs of neo-Nazism in the activities of the Alternative for Germany party. If there is someone who advocates normal relations with our country, we can only support that. But it's not up to us to decide whether that political force is acting under the German constitution. But let me reiterate, we see no signs that we would be concerned about. If the current leadership of Germany sees a threat to itself in the stance of the AfD, then, you know, as they say, it's not a cup of tea. Well, it's it doesn't concern us, as it were. But let me get back to what I've just said. AfD is allegedly suspected of some neo-Nazi views. And what about people who collaborated with the Nazi regime in Ukraine? They are not viewed in the same light. And this is precisely what we call double standards, both in internal politics and in foreign politics. We are going to cooperate with anyone who wants to work with Russia. And we're not giving any political assessment to what's happening inside Germany. It's up to the political authorities in Germany, and it's up to the Constitutional Court of Germany to pass that judgment. But, you know, I cited the example of Hitler. Those who resort to unpolitical means in political fight fail in achieving their political goals. Mr. President, you're probably aware, or maybe not, that the Western media, well, are very passionate about you. They're painting you as a villain, or, oh yes, let them do that. Let them fear me. What about those pictures? Does Mr. Peskov show them to you? No, he does not. He's trying, you know, to preserve my mental state and peace of mind. I know that from time to time, when there is a flare-up of tensions between countries, there are attempts at intimidating the rank-and-file citizens. There is nothing novel about that. And honestly, I don't have time for that. I don't have time to, you know, follow this propaganda. I prefer to work on the substance of our relations with our partners, the partners of today, with potential partners, with former partners, with a view to building and fostering normal relations which will help us secure the goals of our national development. Mr. President, a huge thank you for this frank conversation on behalf of TASS agency and on behalf of our colleagues. Patience to you, good health, and God's help. Yes, I would like to thank you for coming here. Maybe you were instructed to do so, or maybe there was no instruction, but you had the courage to come. Thank you for your interest in what's happening in Russia and what's happening in our relations with other countries amid very difficult conditions. Well, we're not going to dwell on the origins of the situation. Everyone knows about them, but still, a huge thank you for your interest. I would like to say my words of thank you, and I do hope that you will cover all of that in as impartial manner as possible, performing your mission, your duty, trying to do that in a very correct fashion. And I do hope that our meeting today and your work in future will be aimed at repairing and stabilizing our bilateral relations and improving the situation across the world so that we move towards solving the crises rather than fueling them. Thank you.
Что?